Hello, I'm Joseph, the moral philosopher. Today we are going to be talking about the morality around cutting out either family or friends or just people we're associated with in general. We're going to talk about the emotions that lead to that and when it's a good idea and when it is maybe not a good idea. Okay, we're going to have two main emotions that I'm going to say one is more predominant, but there's going to be two main emotions that will lead somebody to want to cut off family. We could add more to that. Let's say two main ones that I'm going to talk about today. First is going to be fear. So this is going to be more rare, but this is going to be instances of where you're in danger because of somebody. So if you have an abusive family member, right, then this is a safety concern. And so cutting that person out of your life is definitely going to be a good idea as long as that is rational. That means that they're actual safety issue and not just an imagined one. So if it's rational, then that's going to be a good thing to do, to cut them out to keep yourself safe. And that might be family members. So like if there's an abusive person in the family, maybe they're abusive towards your kid, then you can act on their behalf. That's going to be more out of the second emotion we're going to talk about, which is resentment. And resentment is very, it's going to be associated with anger and hate. Those things are all similar emotions, although they're specifically different. So it just depends. If I see somebody being abused immediately, that's going to be anger. If I know about it, it's going to be resentment or maybe hate. That's going to linger. And anger is more of an immediate concern. You can say, hey, I'm mad about that. Usually when somebody says, I'm mad about something, usually that emotion isn't anger, but resentment. And I know they're similar, but you have to act on them differently. So, we're going to mostly talk about resentment. I want to add one more, which could be like frustration. That one I'm going to say is probably, it could lead to some like interpersonal conflict, but that I don't think is going to be as likely to have people cut each other out of their lives. So, what is resentment? Resentment is going to be our emotion that is associated with somebody wronging us in some way, or they're wronging others, and we have resentment towards that. This is driving us to seek justice. That's basically what emotion or what resentment does, and that is similar to a safety concern. So if somebody is wronging me in some way, that means from an objective standpoint, they are a hindrance to my ability to survive or prosper. So if they are doing that, then it's rational that I have that resentment. And then the question is, how do we act once we have that? So we need to confirm it. So that means ensure that's rational. It's not thinking that somebody did something that they actually didn't do. How do you solve that type of issue? It's going to be the same way you're going to want to deal with resentment in the first place, which is just going to be dialogue, some kind of communication. If it's more of a safety concern, there might be some vigilance. But generally, resentment, if it's something that needs to be confronted, right, you're seeking that justice, then you're going to do that through dialogue. So somebody's wronged you in some way, so long as you're not putting yourself in danger or there's some other reason why you wouldn't say anything, generally the best course of action is to just address it. So especially with family and friends and stuff like that. If your friend did something that kind of, I don't know, bothers you, you would say something and say, hey, I don't like when you did this. But rationally think did it hurt you? When they did that thing, was it a problem towards your prosperity and survivability? Or did they hurt somebody else that you don't like? In both cases, dialogue is going to make sure that your perception is real, right? And this is where like the word gaslighting gets thrown around, where the person is going to try to trick you into making you think that they didn't do something wrong, even if they did. However, that doesn't just because somebody's trying to gaslight you, I hate using that term, just because they're trying to deceive you in some way, that doesn't mean that they haven't deceived themselves. So a lot of times people will try to justify wrong actions, and say, well, they'll kind of construe it in a way where it was the right thing to do, even though objectively it's not. And so that becomes a form of self-deception. And maybe through the dialogue, you figure that out. You're talking to somebody and say, hey, actually, from my perspective, I don't think what you did was right. And then that's going to lead them, it could lead to conflict, right? You discuss that. Ideally, two people are open-minded and have humility, in which case, if somebody did do something wrong, they're like, oh, I didn't realize that, and then they can seek to make amends for that in some way, or to at least not continue doing that action. So resentment leads us to that. Okay, well, this is two rational people having a reasonable conversation, and then that's not usually the case when you're cutting out friends and family. So one thing is you say, hey, I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to no longer communicate with that person. Now, that is an option. I don't know that it's the best option, right? It depends on circumstances, but generally, the resentment makes us seek justice. And justice is the prevention of further harm. So if somebody did something wrong and you don't say anything, then it's likely they will continue doing that. Just because you say something doesn't mean they will stop, but it might give them pause to reconsider their actions. Well, when we come to a impasse with somebody, right, where either the person you're talking to is not being reasonable, they're not being rational, that's not a word. They're not being rational, they're not being reasonable, they are not willing to hear your perspective. In those cases, particularly if the wrong is committed to you, you're going to want to probably disassociate. So this gets us into social acceptance versus social rejection. And so essentially, if somebody's doing wrong things, typically things that we think are morally wrong, then we tend to want to socially reject that person. This could be somebody you don't know. This is where like virtue signaling comes in, where you make a public announcement like condemning something that somebody did. Like sometimes that is the correct thing to do. Other times people use it to say, look at me, I'm great, they're bad, I'm good. Then it becomes kind of a problem. It becomes a matter of benefiting yourself. It's selfish rather than actually trying to enact justice where you're pointing out something wrong. So motive kind of plays into that on whether you're acting virtuously or vicefully in that situation. In general, when we're talking about friends or family, though, and we see them do something wrong, let's say to us, maybe somebody stole from us, and that's going to raise red flags. We're like, hey, I can't trust this person now. And not saying something about that, I don't think lead to good things, unless you think there's a safety issue. So if you confront somebody and you think by doing that it's gonna put you in danger, then maybe that's not the right thing to do. Maybe social rejection is a better thing, or disassociation, where you just don't associate with that person anymore. That's an option. First level, have dialogue. Make sure you're right. Make sure they understand your perspective. A lot of times, there's one perspective and another perspective, and a lot of times the truth is more in the middle. Not always. Sometimes there's definitely one side is right and one side is wrong, but usually when there's conflict, usually it is a little closer to the middle. It's not going to be, nobody's going to be perfect on either side of that. So that's having humility to come into the conversation with that. But at the same time, you don't want to be gullible. You don't want to be trusting a person. That's how you get gaslit. That's when you accept a deception that they give you. So you have to be cautious of that. Part of that's going to be our trust suspicion system. Generally, if somebody repeats an offense against you in some way, then you know you can't trust them, right? And if you've had conversation before and say, hey, you did this, you stole from me, and that was wrong, and they're like, hey, I'm sorry, whatever reason, they say, oh, I was desperate, or whatever, they give you a reason, and you can accept that. Now, I advise forgiveness requires atonement of some sort, or if it's possible. So if somebody was desperate and they stole money from you, and they spent that money and they have no money, that's why they stole it, they can't necessarily pay you back. You say, hey, look, I understand you was desperate. Next time you should just ask me, I would have helped you out. And you can allow forgiveness as long as somebody acknowledges that they did something wrong. Ideally, if they have remorse, if they have guilt, they're going to want to atone for that. So it's not just a matter of apologizing and saying you're not doing that again, although that's definitely a first step. It is also trying to make amends through some sort of reciprocity is not the word, some making of amends. So that would be if they stole from you, say, hey, I'm eventually going to pay you back in some way. And you say, hey, you can choose to forgive it, or you can say, yeah, I'd appreciate that. That the doing so, or at least the willing to do so, regains trust, and that allows for social acceptance. So, and then if they don't regain that trust, then you start getting social rejection. You start getting distancing. It's like, well, I can't have this person around because I can't trust them. So resentment is going to be that key emotion there that kind of guides us into these dialogues, these conflict potentially, right? It is seeking of justice to make sure that thing, because that's what we're trying to. If we cut family out or friends, what we're trying to do, two things. One is that I'm trying to keep myself safe. That's the fear, but resentment does that too. So if somebody's stealing from me, well, that is I'll say not safety, but that's a prosperity issue, which can affect survivability. So it can be a safety issue. Okay, so resentment is going to lead us to those things, to seek justice. Justice is us preventing further harm, either to ourselves if they've harmed us, or to others. You can't, it depends on let's say we're disassociating from a friend because of a moral or political objection to something they say or do. This is something I would be careful of. So this is social rejection. So you say, hey, I don't like your political belief. It doesn't align with mine, therefore I'm not going to associate with you. And particularly when that's family, that's a bit of a problem. Because I think a lot of that comes without humility. It is the conviction that you are right and they are wrong. And typically, I don't know if it's typically, sometimes that is going to mean that the person who is rejecting family is being hubristic. They think they're right, they think the other person is wrong. Now, they can have dialogue, there can be disagreement. So two people can disagree on things. Typically, I find that people don't have different morals necessarily. What they might have a different priority of what they want to advocate for or contribute towards. But typically, most people have the same concept of good and bad. The problem is information. That let's say two people who have a disagreement it's likely going to be because of the information they have rather than the morality they have. They both think they're doing something morally righteous, and in some ways they might be, but they might be not looking at a situation in the totality. And this political divides are often like this. It's that you have two different groups of information. I don't know, that's not the right way to phrase that, but I think you get my point. Now, communication is going to solve those problems. So if you cut somebody out of your life and you're unwilling to communicate with them, then unless it's because they're directly harming you, that is not gaining justice. And that is that's what resentment is for. So if you have resentment for somebody and it's because of something they believe or something they say or something they think, and then you say, hey, I'm just not going to associate with that person anymore, you didn't actually solve the problem, because the problem was, well, they're being unjust or immoral in some way. That's the assumption there. If you're having resentment because of a person's beliefs rather than a person's actions, then that's irrational, right? Because resentment is that person does something wrong, and if they're just thinking wrong but not doing wrong, then no wrong was committed. Therefore, the resentment is irrational. So I find political division in family and stuff, it's one, lack of communication, lack of shared knowledge. So there might be each side has different knowledge. And then you have that aspect of irrational resentment. So if your resentment is irrational, the person didn't actually do anything wrong, like through action. Maybe they said something you don't agree with, but they didn't. I'm trying not to give a specific example, but let's say, no, I don't want to give a specific example. Sorry. We're going to talk about it abstractly. If somebody does something, or they say they agree with something that you think is wrong, right? That is not a wrongful action for them to have that belief. It is only a wrongful action if they act in a way where that belief manifests in negative consequences, right? Now you could say, well, they voted one way or they voted the other and that had a negative consequence. But that's going to be hubris, because no matter which way you vote, there's going to be positive and negatives no matter who you voted for. And let's face it, most politicians aren't the most ideal people, right? They're just people who are like, well, I don't want to do it. Good enough that they do it. So my point there is that that's irrational resentment, and you shouldn't be cutting people out because of irrational resentment. Instead, you should be having conversation. You should be having more dialogue rather than less. And if you get heated and you fight over it and you say, well, okay, maybe we're not going to agree on that. But if the actions of both parties doesn't actually have significant consequence, then there's no actual wrongdoing that deserves a significant outcome. So the idea is, say, hey, they voted in a different way than me, so I'm never going to talk to them again, and I'm not going to let them talk to my kids again, and I'm not, that becomes hubristic, that becomes irrational. It would be different if, let's talk about slavery, because everybody's pretty much in agreement that slavery is wrong, okay? 99%, okay, a lot of people. To be fair, that slavery still exists in lots of parts of the world, so not everybody's in agreement. In the Western world, we tend to think, hey, slavery is wrong. Let's go with that assumption. Let's say a different person said, well, I think slavery is a great thing. And you're like, I think slavery is not a great thing. Now, the person saying they believe slavery is a good thing does not result in people being enslaved. It doesn't result in them actually doing anything wrong at all. It's just an opinion that, let's say, probably an ignorant opinion. However, there's no wrong committed in that. You can disagree and say, well, I don't agree with that, but there's no justice for a wrong that wasn't committed. That's thought crimes, basically. Oh, they thought the wrong thing. Now, I will admit, thought leads to actions, but we don't punish thoughts, we punish actions. Now, if a person's, no, I can't say that on YouTube. And this will be on Rumble too. But if a person says, I'll say a person, I'll be careful how I say it. Say a person is inciting violence. That's a little bit different because now they're not just expressing an opinion, they are doing it in a way that with the intention of enacting an outcome. Then you can say, that's immoral. But if a person is just a loony person and they're talking to like two people and they're saying, inciting violence in some way, well, we might want to be vigilant and make sure that they aren't committing violence, but a person who is speaking to no one isn't telling anyone to do anything because nobody's listening. A person who is, especially in authority, who is inciting violence, well, that's another story. Now, again, this comes to whether it's rational or not, because it is common for people to say, it is common for people to strawman people and to assume what they think a person thinks or does or says without actually any knowledge of that. And this is going to be irrational, and this will lead to irrational resentment. This could be applied to family or friends, especially in the political sense. So if you think, I'm going to use libertarians because, I'm sorry, folks, I'm going to make fun of you. That way I'm not picking a Democrat or Republican side. I could use the Green Party too. I'm just picking a third party, okay? Let's say the libertarians are, all libertarians think this thing. And this person sounds like a libertarian, therefore I think they think these things. Well, but first, that's going to be a straw man. Second, it's going to be wrong because anytime you say all or none, there's probably nuance to that. Anytime you say always or never, there's probably nuance to that. Very rarely is there's not some exception. And I don't mean that, right, I'm a moral absolutist. I think morals are absolute objective. Now, we can get that wrong, our perspective can be wrong, but the action and the consequences will be objective. So, my point here is the humility and hubris aspect, that if you don't have that, you're likely to project things with hubris, it's closed-mindedness, and you're likely to project things on people that aren't true. So be careful of that. Make sure you are not addressing a person as part of a straw man group, or make sure you're addressing individuals as individuals. If you have a conflict with an individual, don't treat them as an opposing side, treat them as a person, because most people have a variety of views. Very rare that you're going to find people with identical views. And then you start saying, I think they're kind of culty, right? That's why you would call them culty. If everybody believes the exact same thing with no discrepancy and no even slight differences between them, you're going to start thinking, it's like, either they're all right, they're all crazy, or they're a little culty, and they've kind of been brainwashed. So, and which brainwashing can lead to irrational resentment. What's the point to all of this? Be humble, be open-minded. Have dialogue when you have resentment, unless it is unsafe to do so, unsafe to do so. If it's fear instead of resentment, you need to protect your safety. But generally, when you have resentment, you should say something if the outcome will be positive. That doesn't mean be mean to people. I have a bad habit of this myself. Try to do better on that. Kindness is a virtue, something probably all of us can get better at, myself in particular. But you can have, if you're not being kind with other people, then there's going to be that resentment, and it's somewhat rational, somewhat irrational. It depends. Kindness can be seen as adversarial, and it can trigger us to think, or let's say meanness. If somebody's being mean to us, it's gonna trigger that resentment response, because it is like, oh, they're doing something to wrong me. Not necessarily, but it implies intention. It implies contentment. I don't know if I'm saying that right, probably wrong. They have contempt for you. It means they don't value, they have no respect for you. So you have contempt and you have respect. A person who doesn't respect you is a person who's probably not going to have your best interest in mind when they're doing things. And those are people who say, hey, I don't really want to associate with that person, because it is likely that they're going to take advantage of our relationship in some way, no matter what that relationship is. There could be a business relationship, it could be family, it could be friends, it could be anything. But having respect and kindness shows intent that they mean you well. And when you start, even if you think the other person has done something wrong, but you approach it in an unkind way, in a somewhat aggressive way, then you're doing that in a way where they will be defensive. They will have resentment for you, because they will perceive you as the person doing the wrong rather than themselves, even if they initially did a wrong. You're trying to confront that. So when you are conversing with somebody over a issue of wrongdoing, you still want to do that with kindness. Don't do this in an accusatory manner. Do this, say, hey, you did this. This is how I feel about that. This was the result. Is that what you meant? Did you want that to be the outcome? Do you understand how that was perceived? You have these conversations like this that are not hostile, because as soon as you're hostile, a person will sense disrespect, and they're going to want to, then it becomes conflict, and then you end up with closed-mindedness and resentfulness from both sides, because it goes back and forth. So you want to avoid that. Approach people with kindness, with respect, with humility, but don't do it in an unprudent manner. Don't put your safety at risk in the process, and don't do it in a way where you're gullible. Don't be overly trusting. Trust needs to be earned. So if somebody did wrong, and through conversation you're like, yeah, they did something wrong, then before you just give them trust back, there needs to be a form of making of amends. And when a person does that in good faith, then there should be forgiveness, and people can move on, because people can grow given the opportunity. But they need the opportunity for character growth. Otherwise, they'll keep doing the same thing. And if they're never confronted, if you just socially reject a person and never stop to say, hey, this is why people don't like you, maybe. This is the thing. So maybe they don't care, and that's fine, because not everybody's going to please everybody. People have different perspectives. That's just how it's going to be. But when you give people opportunity, then you're allowing them to be part of the social group. That could be your family, that could be your friend network, that could just be an interpersonal relationship. So virtue rather than vice gets us to better outcomes. It allows for other people to grow. It allows us to understand if we're wrong in our perceptions. It allows positive things rather than negative things. So if you're considering, like, hey, should I cut this person out of my family? Oftentimes have a conversation and try to be restrained in your emotions. That doesn't mean you can't say, hey, I feel this way, right? You can express your emotions, but don't let your emotions override you, because you start talking, you get angry, and then there's conflict and nothing comes out of it. It ends up worse than it started with. So kindness, but with truth as well. and you're going to get better results. So if you're going to cut family out, right, think of these things. Is my resentment rational or irrational? Conversation can help you figure that out. Vigilance can help you figure that out. Okay, and then it's, have that conversation. Say, hey, this is what I think you did wrong. This is how we can fix that. Or, don't even go in the way of accusing a person. Go in there with the idea that you are going to present your perspective and not necessarily say your perspective is the true one. I have a perspective, you have a perspective, we have a conversation to figure out, are our perspectives accurate? And the more people involved in a conversation like that, as long as everybody's open-minded and kind to each other, respectful, you can start to get down to a more accurate perspective of reality. And then people can act according. If a person rejects that and they want to be unreasonable, and you can't get any, and you're making your best effort in a virtuous manner, and you can't solve the conflict, then disillusion's fine, right? You say, hey, they're unreasonable. I try to solve this, and it can't be done. I find people don't do that. I find people just say, I'm going to cut it off. Or maybe they've tried subtly, but they haven't done it effectively. So part of it is maybe you don't know how. Hopefully this helps you with that. Virtue in general. Kindness, truth, not accusatory, not disrespectful. And those will lead to better conversations and better allowance for a stronger relationship, because you're helping them become a better person, potentially, or you're wrong and they're going to help you in some way. And everybody benefits from that. Usually it's going to build a closer social bond rather than making it worse. Especially if you're building up that resentment. Don't let it linger. Resentment that lingers becomes hate, and it leads to very negative things. Emotions don't go away until you address them. So when it comes to resentment, you need to address them if that's going to lead to positive outcomes, or you need to leave the situation so that you're no longer wrong in the process. Hopefully that answers kind of, and this applies to all relationships. Hopefully this video kind of explains resentment and proper versus improper ways of acting on that is likely to lead to positive rather than negative outcomes. I'm Joseph, the Moral Philosopher. If you like the video, hit like, subscribe, because I do videos like this all the time. Typically, I talk about a topical event. This one kind of is, but I'm not going to get into that. Just something I observed. So, but I try to apply my moral philosophy that I have to various topical situations as a way to understand it. This video was a bit more abstract, and it wasn't a particular incident like I normally talk about. I'm writing a book which is going to be very similar to that, where it's more abstract and hypothetical examples rather than specifics, although some of those are based off of real world things. So that's coming eventually. I'm still working on it. It's mostly done, but we're getting there. So like, subscribe, see you in the next video. You'll see me, I won't see you, because that's how videos work.